A blind, obese virgin was sold to a mountain man for nothing more than chicken bones. The crowd in the saloon laughs, the church bell tolls, and wagon wheels creak into the night. Everyone thinks this lonely mountain giant bought her for shame. But they are dead wrong, because in a cabin hidden deep in the pines, his plans are nothing like the cruel world expects. He doesn't want a servant. He doesn't want a prize. He wants to build a refuge for the lost children no one else will claim. But the law is coming. The town is ready to tear it all down, and the cruel father who sold her swears he'll take her back. What secret papers hide in the mountain man's chest? What vow will bind them together when the noose of the law tightens? And when the children's future hangs in the balance, will mercy or violence decide their fate? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The wooden floorboards creaked under worn boots as miners and cowboys packed the dimly lit saloon. Tobacco smoke hung thick in the air, curling around the oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The sharp clink of whiskey glasses mixed with coarse laughter and the slap of cards on scarred tables. Hannah Mae Collins stood rigid, her unseeing eyes cast downward as her father's iron grip dug into her arm. The familiar smells of stale beer and unwashed bodies made her stomach turn. Though she couldn't see the men's faces, their jeers and whistles told her everything she needed to know about their cruel intentions. "Got myself a burden to unload," her father bellowed, giving her a rough shake. "My cursed daughter here needs a man to take her off my hands." His words slurred with drink, but the hatred in his voice cut clear and sharp. Hannah Mae's cheeks burned with shame. She'd known this day was coming ever since her mother passed last winter. Her father had made it clear enough that he considered her nothing but a mouth to feed, a reminder of his misfortune in having a blind daughter. "Ain't much to look at," someone called out, triggering a wave of laughter. "Better off with a pack mule." "How's she supposed to cook if she can't see what she's doing?" another voice drawled. Hannah Mae's fingers twisted in her worn dress. She knew she wasn't what most would consider a prize. 25 years old, blind since childhood, and carrying more weight than was fashionable. But she had worth beyond what these men could see. She could recite whole chapters of scripture from memory, cook by touch and smell, and tend to children with gentle hands. "Make an offer," her father demanded, swaying slightly. "Anything to be rid of her?" The saloon grew quiet for a moment before someone shouted, "I'll give you a rusty horseshoe." This brought fresh guffaws from the crowd. "2 bent nails and a broken bridle," another called. Each offer cut deeper than the last. Hannah Mae's throat tightened, but she refused to let these men see her cry. She'd learned long ago to keep her tears private, saved for her pillow at night. Then came the words that brought the house down. "I'll trade you this here sack of chicken bones." A gambler's voice rang out, followed by the thud of something hitting the bar. The saloon erupted in the loudest laughter yet, men pounding tables and slapping their knees. Hannah Mae's shoulders hunched inward, as if she could somehow make herself small enough to disappear. The noise pressed in around her like a physical weight until suddenly, everything changed. The saloon's front door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold spring air that cut through the smoky haze. The laughter died away as heavy footsteps crossed the threshold, accompanied by the soft pat of melting snow falling from a coat. The silence grew thick enough to slice. Hannah Mae felt the shift in the room's energy, heard the subtle scrape of chairs as men moved aside. Though she couldn't see him, she sensed a presence of unusual size drawing near. "I'll take those bones." The voice was deep and quiet, yet it filled the room. Hannah Mae had never heard it before, but something in its calm steadiness made her breath catch. "Well, if it ain't Elias Boone," someone muttered, followed by nervous chuckles that quickly died away. Hannah Mae had heard whispers about the mountain man, how he lived alone up in the high country, how he'd once been an army scout, how he rarely came to town, but when he did, people cleared a path. They said he was big as a bear and twice as dangerous when riled. The heavy footsteps approached the bar, coins clinked against wood. "The bones," Elias Boone said again, "and the woman." Her father's grip loosened slightly. "Now see here, Boone. You were selling. It wasn't a question. I'm buying. More coins hit the bar, followed by the rustle of paper money. Hannah May heard her father count under his breath, then felt him release her arm entirely. "She's yours then," he said, his voice thick with drink and something else. Relief, perhaps, at finally being rid of her. No returns. A new hand took her elbow, large and calloused but with unexpected gentleness. "Miss Collins," the deep voice said quietly, "come with me." The saloon erupted again in laughter, men shouting crude suggestions and making bawdy jokes about the mountain man and his new prize. But Hannah May barely heard them. She was too focused on the steady presence beside her, guiding her carefully through the crowd. The night air hit her face like a blessing as they stepped outside. Snow was falling lightly. She could feel the delicate touch of flakes on her cheeks. The sounds of the saloon faded behind them as Elias Boone led her to what she assumed was his wagon. "Step up here," he said, positioning her hands on the wagon's side. "Watch your footing." His help was practical, neither condescending nor impatient as she found her way onto the seat. The wagon springs creaked as he climbed up beside her. Hannah May sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, uncertainty churning in her stomach. She had no idea what kind of man had just bought her, what kind of life awaited her. Had she truly escaped, or was this new owner going to be worse than her father? The reins snapped softly and the wagon began to move. Its wheels creaked against the snow-dusted ground as they rolled away from the only home she'd ever known. Above them, though Hannah May couldn't see them, cold stars wheeled in the vast mountain sky, witnessing this strange journey's beginning. They rode in silence for several minutes before Elias spoke again, his voice as gentle as before. "There's a blanket behind you, Miss Collins." Night's getting cold. Hannah May reached back, finding the rough wool blanket and pulling it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, her first words of the evening. The wagon continued its steady pace, carrying them away from the lights and noise of town. Hannah May sat straight-backed, trying to gather her courage to ask the question burning in her mind. Finally, she managed, "Sir, why did you do it?" The wagon wheels turned several more times before he answered. "No person should be sold like cattle," he said simply, "least of all for chicken bones." "But what?" She swallowed hard. "What do you expect of me?" "Nothing you're not willing to give." His voice remained steady. "I've got a cabin up in the hills. It needs a woman's touch, truth be told. But you'll have your own room, your own space. No one will harm you there." Hannah May's fingers clutched the blanket tighter, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I can cook," she offered quietly, "and clean and mend clothes. I'm good with children too, though I don't suppose you have any of those up in the hills." "Not yet," he said, something warming his voice slightly. "But there's talk of orphans needing homes after the fever that swept through last month. Might be we could help with that, if you're willing." For the first time that evening, Hannah May felt something like hope flutter in her chest. She turned her face toward the man beside her, wishing she could see his expression. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Boone." "Elias," he corrected gently. "We're going to be family now, one way or another. Might as well use first names." The wagon rolled on through the night, its steady motion almost soothing now. Hannah May felt the tension slowly leaving her shoulders as they climbed higher into the hills, leaving behind the town and all its cruel laughter. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but something told her that this strange twist of fate, being bought with chicken bones by a mountain man, might just turn out to be God's way of answering her long-held prayers for deliverance. The stars continued their silent watch as the wagon disappeared into the darkness, its creaking wheels carrying two lonely souls toward what could be a new beginning for them both. The wagon rolled steadily northward through stands of towering pines. Their branches hung heavy with late spring snow, casting long shadows across the mountain trail. Hannah May sat rigid on the wooden seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Though she couldn't see the path ahead, she felt every bump and dip as the wheels navigated the rocky terrain. Years of her father's cruel words echoed in her mind. Useless burden, he'd called her. God's punishment. Her shoulders tensed, waiting for the moment when this strange mountain man's true nature would reveal itself. Kind words could mask cruel intentions. She'd learned that lesson well enough. A chill wind whipped down from the heights, cutting through her thin dress. Before she could suppress it, a shiver ran through her body. The wagon slowed slightly. "Here," Elias said, his deep voice gentle. She heard him shifting beside her, then felt something heavy and warm being draped across her shoulders. Nights get cold up here, even in spring. The wool blanket smelled of pine smoke and horses, but it was clean and thick. Hannah May's fingers curled into its rough warmth before she could stop herself. "Thank you," she whispered, the words strange on her tongue. When was the last time she'd had cause to thank anyone? They continued climbing, the horses' hooves striking a steady rhythm against the rocky trail. As they rounded what felt like a sharp ridge, a chorus of wild howls split the night air. Hannah May startled, clutching the blanket tighter. "Just coyotes," Elias assured her. "They won't come near the wagon." The howls faded into the distance, leaving behind the creak of wheels and the soft snorting of horses. Hannah May gathered her courage, voicing the question that had burned in her mind since they'd left town. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why did you buy me?" The wagon wheels turned several times before he answered. When he did, his voice was steady and sure. "Because you deserved better than that room full of jackals." Hannah May's breath caught in her throat. She turned her face toward him, wishing not for the first time that she could see his expression. The simple declaration struck her speechless. No one had ever suggested she deserved anything better than what life had dealt her. As darkness deepened around them, Elias guided the wagon off the main trail. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "Too dangerous to navigate these mountain paths in the dark." Hannah May heard him jump down from the wagon, his boots crunching in the snow. He helped her down with those same careful hands, making sure she was steady on her feet before letting go. She stood still, listening to him move around the wagon, unhitching the horses, gathering firewood, setting up camp with practiced efficiency. Soon the snap and pop of a campfire reached her ears, along with the savory smell of meat roasting. Her stomach growled traitorously. She couldn't remember when she'd eaten last. "Come closer to the fire," Elias called. "Ground's clear between you and me. Just walk straight ahead." Hannah May took careful steps forward until she felt the fire's warmth on her face. She sank down onto what felt like a fallen log, keeping the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Here." Something was pressed into her hands, a tin plate, warm and heavy with food. "Rabbit," he explained. "Shot it this morning before coming to town." She hesitated, waiting for him to begin eating first as she'd always been taught. Instead, she heard him settling back against what sounded like his saddle. "Go on," he encouraged. "Eat while it's hot." Hannah May's fingers found the meat still steaming. She took a small bite, then another larger one as the rich flavor filled her mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten first at any meal. "My father," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "He always said I was a curse. That's why he wanted to be rid of me." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. When Elias spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "God don't make curses. People do." Tears pricked at Hannah May's eyes. She blinked them back, focusing on finishing her meal. They spoke little after that, but the silence felt comfortable rather than threatening. As she settled onto her bedroll, another surprise that he'd thought to bring one for her, she heard Elias moving around the campsite, checking the horses one last time. Then his deep voice carried softly through the darkness, speaking words she hadn't heard since her mother died. Evening prayers. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the pop of dying embers and the whisper of wind through pine boughs. Above her, stars she couldn't see wheeled across the vast mountain sky. Everything familiar had been stripped away, leaving her adrift in uncertainty. Yet something about Elias's quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, made her wonder if perhaps this upheaval was God's answer to years of desperate prayers. Morning came with the chirping of mountain birds and the stamp of horses' hooves. Hannah May woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Elias moving quietly around the camp. "Morning," he said when he heard her stirring. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some." She sat up, smoothing her hair back from her face. "Yes, please." He pressed a warm tin cup into her hands, making sure she had a good grip before letting go. The coffee was strong and sweet. He'd added sugar without her having to ask. After a simple breakfast of jerky and hard biscuits, Elias helped her back onto the wagon seat. His large hands were sure and steady, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. The blanket appeared around her shoulders again before she could even feel the morning chill. They set out as the sun rose higher, climbing steadily into the mountains. Hannah May could feel the air growing thinner, smell the sharp scent of pine growing stronger. Everything was changing. The altitude, the temperature, her entire life's direction. She didn't know what waited at the end of this journey, but for the first time in years, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her heart. The wagon continued its steady climb as the sun reached its peak. Hannah May sat straight-backed beside the mountain man who had bought her with chicken bones and treated her with more dignity in one night than she'd known in years. Her life had turned onto an unexpected path, and though she couldn't see where it led, she found herself trusting the quiet strength of the man beside her to guide them true. The wagon wheels creaked as they crested the final hill. Hannah May felt the shift in the air, a subtle change that spoke of open space ahead. The horses' hooves moved from rocky ground to what sounded like packed earth, their pace slowing as Elias guided them to a stop. "We're here," he said quietly. Hannah May sat straighter, turning her face into the late afternoon breeze. It carried the scent of pine, wild sage, and something else. Wood smoke, perhaps, though distant and stale. "Let me help you down," Elias offered. His strong hands encircled her waist, lifting her from the wagon seat as if she weighed no more than a child. He set her carefully on solid ground, keeping one hand at her elbow until she found her balance. "The cabin's just ahead," he said. "About 10 paces, ground's mostly level, but watch for the old flagstones. They're a mite uneven." Hannah May took tentative steps forward, one hand extended. Her fingers soon met rough-hewn logs, weathered by years of mountain storms. She traced the timber's surface, feeling the careful notching at the corners, the spots where moss had taken hold in the cracks. From somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, she heard what sounded like children's laughter. Her head tilted, uncertain if she'd imagined it. "Elias?" she questioned softly. "I thought I heard." "Aye," he confirmed. "That'll be the McCullough kids down in the valley. Their pa works the silver mine." He cleared his throat, and something in his tone made Hannah May's fingers still against the cabin wall. "Which brings me to something we need to discuss." She turned toward his voice, waiting. The wind rustled through what must be tall pines nearby, and a bird called from somewhere overhead. "This cabin," Elias began slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "It's sound enough, but it needs work. Fences down in places. Smokehouse hasn't seen use in too long." He took a deep breath. "But with some fixing up, it could be something more than just a mountain man's shelter. Could be a proper home." Hannah May's brow furrowed slightly. "I don't understand." "There's been trouble lately. Railroad disputes, fever outbreaks in the mining camps. Left more than a few little ones with no place to go." His voice grew softer. "I aim to make this a refuge. A safe place for children who've lost everything else." Hannah May's lips parted in surprise. Of all the things she'd imagined this strange mountain man might want from her, this had never crossed her mind. "But why bring me here?" "Because," Elias said gently, "I reckon you've been unwanted. Same as them. You'll know how to show them kindness, how to help them feel they belong somewhere again." Tears pricked at Hannah May's eyes. She blinked them back, overwhelmed by the simple truth in his words. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. "Afternoon, Mr. Boone," a young voice called out. "Pa sent me up with news." "Tommy McCullough," Elias explained quietly to Hannah May, then raised his voice. "What news, boy?" Horse and rider came to a stop nearby. Hannah Mae heard the creak of leather as the boy shifted in his saddle. "That family that passed through last week?" Tommy said. "The ones heading to California? They left 2 little ones at the mission station. Sister Mary asked if you were still willing to take in children what needed homes." "I am," Elias confirmed. "How old?" "Girls about 6, boys maybe 4. Their ma died of fever on the trail. Pa couldn't manage them and the wagon train both." Tommy's voice carried a note of sympathy beyond his years. "Sister Mary's keeping them till tomorrow. I can bring them up then if you like." "Much obliged, Tommy. We'll be ready." The boy's horse snorted and pawed at the ground. "Pa says he'll come help with that fence when he can." "Oh, and Ma sent these." Something rustled, a paper package changing hands. "Fresh bread and some dried apple rings. Said anybody taking on orphans could use a bit of extra food." "Thank your ma for us," Elias said warmly. "Tell her Miss Hannah Mae and I are grateful." After Tommy rode away, Hannah Mae stood silent for a long moment, her hand still resting against the cabin's rough wall. "2 children," she said softly. "Tomorrow. If you're willing," Elias added quickly. "I know it's sudden, but they need someone, and I thought—" He trailed off, uncertainty creeping into his usually steady voice. Hannah Mae took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "We'll need to unpack the supplies," she said firmly, "and you'll have to show me around the cabin so I can learn where everything is before they arrive." She heard the smile in Elias's voice when he responded, "Yes, ma'am." They spent the next hour bringing supplies into the cabin. Elias described each room as they moved through them. The main room with its stone fireplace, the small bedroom off to one side, the lean-to kitchen with its iron cook stove. Hannah Mae ran her hands over furniture and walls, building a map in her mind. "Stove's got good draw," Elias commented as they stored the last of the supplies. "Beans should cook up fine for supper. Do you—" He hesitated. "Do you need help with the cooking?" Hannah Mae shook her head, already rolling up her sleeves. "I can manage just fine. Been cooking blind since I was 12 years old. Just tell me where everything is and I'll get started." She heard him moving around the kitchen, describing the location of each item as he touched it. "Coffee pots here on the back of the stove, beans in the sack by your left hand, salt porks in the stone crock, plates stacked here, cups hanging on these pegs." Hannah Mae absorbed it all, her fingers skimming each surface and object, adding them to her mental picture of the space. Soon she had a pot of beans simmering on the stove, seasoned with salt pork and the last of her father's dried peppers, the only thing she'd brought from her old life. As she stirred the pot, she heard Elias moving around outside, chopping wood by the sound of it. The steady thunk of the axe provided a rhythm to her thoughts as she considered the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday morning, she'd woken in her father's house, dreading another day of his bitter words and heavy hands. Now she stood in a mountain cabin, cooking supper for a man who'd bought her with chicken bones and offered her a chance to help other unwanted children find a home. The beans were just starting to soften when Elias came back inside. She heard him washing up at the pump, then settling into what sounded like a wooden chair near the fireplace. "Smells good," he commented. "Should be ready soon," she replied, testing the beans with a wooden spoon. "There's bread from Mrs. McCullough, too." They ate in comfortable silence as evening settled around the cabin. Hannah Mae found herself relaxing slightly, the uncertainty of her situation easing with each passing hour. Whatever else might come, she was no longer in that smoke-filled saloon, being auctioned off like unwanted livestock. As she cleared the dishes away, a thought struck her. "Elias, where will the children sleep?" "Been working on that," he answered. "Got lumber cut for proper beds. Just need to put them together tomorrow morning. Reckon they can take the bedroom. It's small, but it'll do for now. I'll sleep out here by the fire. And me? There's a root cellar out back," he said slowly. "Thought we might turn it into a sleeping room for you. It's dry, and with some work, it could be right comfortable. That is, if you're planning to stay." Hannah Mae's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. Was she planning to stay? Did she have a choice? But even as the questions formed in her mind, she knew the answer. This strange mountain man had offered her more than just escape from her father's cruelty. He'd offered her purpose, a chance to help other unwanted souls find their place in the world. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm staying. Those children will need someone who understands what it's like to feel lost." She heard Elias shift in his chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of relief. "Reckon they will at that." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Hannah Mae stood in the cabin that would become a refuge, feeling the warmth of the cook stove at her back and the promise of tomorrow in her heart. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt useful, needed, perhaps even wanted. Morning crept through the cabin's timber walls, painting stripes of golden light across the plank floor. Hannah Mae woke to the sound of birds and the soft clatter of Elias moving about the main room. She had slept on a makeshift pallet by the stove, wrapped in the same blanket he had given her during their wagon journey. "Need to ride into town," Elias said as she stirred. "Got to fetch more lumber for the children's beds. You'll be all right here?" Hannah Mae sat up, smoothing her hair. "Yes, I should learn my way around proper while it's quiet." "There's coffee on the stove," he told her, "and biscuits warming in the oven. Won't be gone more than a few hours." She heard him shrugging into his coat, then the heavy tread of his boots across the floor. The door creaked open, letting in a rush of cool mountain air. "Elias?" she called softly. He paused. "Thank you for the coffee and biscuits." "Ain't nothing," he mumbled. But she caught the pleased note in his voice before the door closed behind him. Soon after, she heard hoofbeats moving away from the cabin. Hannah Mae rose and carefully made her way to the stove, where she found the coffee pot exactly where he had described it the night before. She poured herself a cup, savoring the rich aroma. With the cabin to herself, Hannah Mae began her careful exploration. She moved slowly, trailing her fingers along walls and furniture, counting steps between objects, memorizing the location of every item. In the kitchen, she arranged the dishes in a way that made sense to her touch. Plates stacked by size, cups hung on pegs within easy reach, utensils sorted by shape and use. The work soothed her. Each item she touched, each space she mapped in her mind, made the cabin feel more real, more like a place she might belong. By midday, she could move confidently from the stove to the table, from the water pump to the cupboard without hesitation. She was just testing the heat of the cook stove, planning to warm some beans for lunch, when she heard the wagon approaching. Her heart quickened. Elias had returned, and he wouldn't be alone. The wagon creaked to a stop outside. Hannah Mae smoothed her skirts and moved toward the door, listening intently. "Here we are," she heard Elias say, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "This here's your new home." A child sniffled. Another one whispered something too soft to catch. "Miss Hannah Mae's inside," Elias continued. "She's real nice. Makes the best biscuits you ever tasted." The door opened and Hannah Mae felt the presence of 3 people entering. Elias's solid warmth and 2 smaller figures that seemed to shrink against him. "Children," Elias said quietly. "This here's Miss Hannah Mae. Hannah Mae. This is Sarah, she's 6 years old, and her brother James, who's 4. Hannah Mae knelt carefully, bringing herself closer to their level. "Welcome," she said softly, reaching into her apron pocket for the bread Mrs. McCullough had sent. "You must be hungry after your journey. Would you like some fresh bread?" There was a moment of hesitation, then small feet shuffled forward. "It's all right," she encouraged. "Take as much as you want. There's honey too, if you'd like some." "Are you blind?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, I am," Hannah Mae answered honestly. "But I can still do lots of things. I can cook and clean and tell stories. Would you like to hear a story while you eat?" "Yes, please," came the boy's voice, speaking for the first time. Hannah Mae smiled, hearing them settle on the floor near her. She began to hum softly, an old hymn her mother had sung to her before the fever took her sight. As she hummed, she broke the bread into pieces, drizzling each with a little honey. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she sang quietly, feeling the children relax as they ate. "That saved a wretch like me." From across the room, she heard Elias moving quietly, setting down lumber he'd brought from town. but she could feel his attention on them, watching this first careful connection being forged. The afternoon passed in gentle moments. Hannah Mae showed Sarah how to fold clean linens, teaching her fingers to find the corners by touch. James followed them around the cabin, asking questions about everything Hannah Mae touched. Their voices grew stronger, more curious, as fear gave way to interest. As evening approached, Hannah Mae taught them to set the table while Elias worked outside, putting together the promised beds. The children jumped at every loud noise, but Hannah Mae kept them busy, showing them where everything belonged. "Time to eat?" Elias called finally, coming in from his work. The children grew quiet again at his deep voice, but Hannah Mae had soup ready and fresh biscuits warming. They gathered around the table, their first meal together as a strange, new family. Hannah Mae heard the children's tentative movements, the careful way they handled their spoons, as if expecting to be scolded for every small sound. "Would you like to hear a story?" she offered as they ate. "A special one from the Bible?" "Yes, please," Sarah whispered. James echoed her softly. Hannah Mae smiled and began the tale she had chosen carefully, the story of Ruth and Boaz. She told of Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, of leaving her home to travel to a strange land. She described the kindness of Boaz, who saw Ruth gleaning in his fields and ordered his workers to leave extra grain for her. "Why have I found such favor in your eyes?" then Hannah Mae recited, remembering every word. "That you should take notice of me, a foreigner." She heard both children lean forward, caught up in the tale. And Boaz answered, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." The children gasped softly at the beautiful words. Even Elias had gone still, his spoon quiet against his bowl. Hannah Mae continued the story, telling of how Boaz married Ruth, how they found happiness together and became part of God's greater plan. As she spoke, the cabin grew warm and close around them, the fire crackling in the hearth. When the story ended, James asked sleepily, "Can you tell another one tomorrow?" "Of course," Hannah Mae promised. "I know lots of stories." Soon after, Elias showed the children to their new beds, built fresh that afternoon. Hannah Mae heard him speaking quietly to them, explaining where to find him if they needed anything in the night. Later, as the children slept, Hannah Mae sat by the fire while Elias added another log. The flames popped and sighed, sending warmth through the cabin. "Thank you," Elias said softly. "For what?" "For knowing what they needed, for making them feel safe." He paused. "I wouldn't have known how." Hannah Mae smiled in the firelight she couldn't see. "God gives us different gifts. You gave them shelter. I'll give them stories. Together, maybe we can give them a home." Outside, the wind rose in the pines, carrying the first hint of winter's approach. But inside the cabin, the fire crackled steadily, and for the first time in years, Hannah Mae felt truly useful, truly needed, perhaps even truly at home. She heard Elias settle into his chair by the fire, his quiet "Amen" barely a whisper as he offered his own thanks to God. The peace of the moment settled over them like a warm blanket, wrapping around their unlikely family like a promise of better days to come. Days flowed into one another like a gentle stream as the household settled into its rhythms. Hannah Mae woke early each morning, her fingers trailing along the cabin walls until she reached the kitchen. The sound of little feet padding across the wooden floor soon followed as Sarah and James emerged from their room, drawn by the smell of cornbread baking. "Can I help?" Sarah would ask, her voice growing stronger each day. Hannah Mae showed them how to measure ingredients by touch, teaching Sarah to feel the difference between flour and cornmeal. "See how the cornmeal's more grainy?" she explained, guiding the girls' small hands. "That's how you know which is which." James proved eager to help too, though his enthusiasm sometimes led to spills. "It's all right," Hannah Mae would say, showing him how to sweep with the rough bristled broom. "That's why we clean as we go." Outside, the steady rhythm of Elias's work filled the air. The sharp crack of his axe splitting wood, the hollow thump of fence posts being driven into the earth, the metallic clink of trap chains being set. All these sounds became part of their daily song. One particularly warm afternoon, Hannah Mae sat on the porch steps, showing the children how to shell peas. The steady pop of pods and patter of peas into the tin bowl made a soothing melody. "Rider coming?" Elias called from where he worked on the fence. Hannah Mae heard hoofbeats approaching at an unhurried pace. The children pressed closer to her sides, still wary of strangers. "Good afternoon," a man's voice called out. "I'm Reverend Thomas Parker, circuit preacher for these parts." "Welcome, Reverend," Elias replied. Hannah Mae heard his boots crossing the yard. "What brings you up this way?" "Word travels even in these mountains," the preacher said, dismounting with a creak of leather. "Heard tell of a mountain man taking in orphans. Had to see for myself." Hannah Mae felt the preacher's attention turn toward her and the children. His boots scuffed the dirt as he approached. "This here's Hannah Mae Collins," Elias introduced her, "and Sarah and James." "Ma'am," the preacher said kindly. "Children, the Lord's blessing on you all." Hannah Mae nodded politely, keeping her hands steady on the pea pods so the children would stay calm. "Would you care for some water, Reverend? The day's mighty warm." "Much obliged," he answered. They settled on the porch, the preacher in the old rocking chair while Elias leaned against a post. Hannah Mae could sense the children's curiosity warring with their shyness as they listened to the adults talk. "It's a noble thing you're doing," Reverend Parker said after a while. "These little ones need Christian charity more than most." He paused, and Hannah Mae heard him shift in the creaking chair. "But I should warn you, the town council may not look kindly on this venture." "How so?" Elias asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Some folks are set in their ways," the preacher explained. "They might question the propriety of your arrangement here. A single man, a blind woman, taking in children with no official papers." "We aim to do right by them," Elias said firmly. "I believe you do," Reverend Parker assured them. "And you have my blessing for what it's worth. I'll speak to the council if needed. But be prepared for questions, maybe even opposition." Thunder rumbled in the distance as the preacher took his leave. Hannah Mae felt the air growing heavy with approaching rain. "Storm's coming," she said, gathering the children inside. "Let's get supper started before it hits." The first fat drops were falling as Elias came in from securing the animals. Wind rattled the window panes, and thunder crashed closer now. James whimpered, and Sarah pressed against Hannah Mae's skirts. "Come here, little ones," Hannah Mae said, settling into her chair by the fire. The children climbed into her lap as lightning flashed outside. "Shall I tell you about the time Jesus calmed a storm?" They nodded against her shoulder as she began the familiar story. Her voice remained steady through each thunderclap, her hands gentle on their backs. Gradually, their trembling eased. Later, after the children were asleep in their beds, Hannah Mae sat by the fire with Elias. The storm still raged outside, but its fury had moved further off. "What the preacher said," Elias began slowly, "about the town council. He might be right." "We'll face that when we must," Hannah Mae replied. "The Lord will show us the way." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and distant thunder. Hannah Mae sensed there was more weighing on Elias's mind. "There's something you should know," he said finally, his voice heavy with old pain. "Something I did years ago." Hannah Mae turned toward his voice, waiting. "I was a scout for the army," he continued. "During the Apache Wars, helped them find villages, hidden places where people were trying to survive." His voice grew rough. "Watched those villages burn, heard the screams, did nothing to stop it." The fire popped and hissed in the silence that followed. "I carry that shame like a stone in my gut," Elias said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve any peace after what I'd done." Hannah Mae considered his words carefully before speaking. "Perhaps," she said gently, "God is giving you another chance. A chance to build instead of destroy, to shelter instead of harm." She heard his sharp intake of breath. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she continued. "Maybe He led you to that saloon that night, led you to these children, for just this purpose, to help you find redemption through love instead of hate." Elias remained silent, but Hannah May could feel the weight of his attention, the way he absorbed her words like parched earth drinking rain. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the cabin in brilliant flashes. Hannah May gathered her shawl closer and began to hum softly. "Amazing Grace," the hymn that had always brought her comfort in dark times. The ancient words filled the cabin like a blessing. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." On her lap, the children slept peacefully, safe in her embrace despite the storm. Across the room, she heard Elias's quiet "Amen," and knew that something had shifted between them, some new understanding born in the thunder-filled night. The storm rolled on, but inside the cabin, hope glowed as steady as the fire on the hearth. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean but treacherous. Mud squelched under Elias's boots as he made his morning rounds, checking the animals and fences for storm damage. The air still held the sharp scent of rain when he reached the front gate. Something white caught his eye, a piece of paper nailed to the wooden post, its edges damp from the night's downpour. Elias pulled it free, his weathered hands careful with the soggy paper as he unfolded it. The neat official handwriting made his stomach clench. "To the resident of Mountain Creek Homestead, it has come to the attention of the town council that you are harboring minor children without proper documentation or legal authority. This matter requires immediate review." Anger rose in Elias's chest like a flash flood. His hands shook as he read the rest. Demands for papers, threats of intervention, cold words about proper channels, and legal guardianship. He strode back to the cabin, boots leaving deep prints in the mud. The paper crumpled in his fist as he pushed through the door. Hannah May stood at the stove, her sure hands moving confidently over the cooking surface as she prepared breakfast. She turned her head at his entrance, sensing his tension. "What's wrong?" "Town council," Elias growled, tossing the damp paper onto the table. "They're questioning our right to keep the children." Hannah May wiped her hands on her apron and moved carefully to the table, her fingers finding the crumpled note. Though she couldn't read it, she smoothed it flat with gentle motions. "Tell me what it says." As Elias repeated the contents, his voice grew harder with each word. "They can't do this. These children have nowhere else to go." "Hush now," Hannah May said softly, mindful of the still sleeping children. "Let's answer them with kindness, not fire." "Kindness?" Elias paced the wooden floor. "They're threatening to take the children." "They're scared of what they don't understand," Hannah May replied, her voice steady as a mountain stream. "Fear makes people harsh. We must show them there's nothing to fear here." Before Elias could respond, hoofbeats approached the cabin. A wagon creaked to a stop outside. "Someone's coming," Hannah May said, turning her face toward the door. Elias opened it to find Mrs. Peterson, the midwife, climbing down from her wagon. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, grief. "Mr. Boone," she said, nodding tiredly. "I've brought another one needing shelter." She turned to the wagon bed where a small figure huddled under a blanket. "Come on, Thomas. These are good people." A boy emerged slowly, perhaps 7 years old, with copper skin and dark eyes that darted everywhere at once. His clothes were too thin for the mountain morning, and his small shoulders were tense with wariness. "His mother died 2 days ago," Mrs. Peterson explained quietly. "Fever took her quick. No other family to speak of." "His father?" Elias asked, though he thought he knew the answer from the boy's features. "Apache," Mrs. Peterson confirmed. "Killed in a raid last year. The boy speaks both languages, but..." She hesitated. "Town folks aren't kindly disposed to half-breeds." Hannah May had appeared in the doorway, her face tilted toward the sound of voices. "Welcome, Thomas," she said warmly. "You must be hungry after your journey." The boy's eyes widened at her blindness, but something in her gentle tone made him straighten slightly. "There's fresh stew on the stove," Hannah May continued, stepping back into the cabin. "Come in where it's warm." Mrs. Peterson touched Elias's arm. I know you've got your hands full already, but he's welcome here, Elias said firmly, watching Thomas follow Hannah May inside. In the cabin, Hannah May was already ladling stew into a bowl. She held it out, waiting until she felt Thomas's small hands take it. Careful now, it's hot, she warned kindly. Sit here at the table. Sarah and James had woken and emerged from their room, watching the newcomer with curious eyes. Children, Hannah May called. This is Thomas. He's come to stay with us. Sarah, would you show him where we keep the spoons? Sarah nodded and went to the drawer, returning with a spoon which she offered to Tomas. He took it with a shy gracias, then quickly added, Thank you. You speak 2 languages? Hannah May asked, interest warming her voice. What a wonderful gift. Tomas ducked his head, but his shoulders relaxed slightly at her praise. Through the morning, whispers from town drifted up the mountain like smoke signals. Visitors dropped by on thin excuses, their curious eyes lingering on Thomas. Some offered false sympathy, others barely hidden disapproval. Hannah May met each intrusion with gracious calm, her blindness perhaps a blessing as she couldn't see their judging looks. She kept Thomas close, teaching him the layout of the cabin, showing him how she identified items by touch and location. Everything has its place, she explained, guiding his hands to the shelf where they kept the cups. That way we always know where to find what we need. By afternoon, Thomas had begun to uncoil from his defensive posture. He helped Sarah collect eggs from the henhouse and showed James how to make a simple snare from twine, skills learned from his mother's people. Elias watched it all from the dooryard where he split wood, his axe falling in steady rhythm. The town's judgment weighed on him like storm clouds, but Hannah May's quiet strength kept showing him another way. As evening approached, Hannah May gathered the children for prayers before supper. Elias paused in his work, standing silent in the deepening dusk as her voice carried through the open door. The Lord is my shepherd, she taught them, the children's voices joining hers in simple repetition. I shall not want. Thomas listened intently, his lips moving to shape the unfamiliar words. When Hannah May switched to Spanish, his eyes lit with surprise and gratitude. El Señor es mi pastor, she said carefully, her accent imperfect but her meaning clear. Nada me faltará. Elias felt something catch in his throat. Here was this woman, cast off by her own father, embracing a child others would shun, teaching him that he belonged, that his 2 languages were gifts, not burdens. The stars were beginning to appear, bright points of light in the darkening sky. Elias stood torn between 2 forces, fear of the town's power to destroy what they'd built, and awe at Hannah May's quiet courage in building it anyway. Above the cabin, the stars spread wide in their eternal dance, bearing witness to both the promise and the danger of what they'd begun. In the warm lamplight inside, Hannah May's voice continued steady and sure, weaving English and Spanish into a blanket of belonging around a boy who had lost everything but found, perhaps, a new kind of home. Through the window, Elias watched Thomas lean against Hannah May's side, his small face peaceful for the first time since arriving. Sarah held his hand while James sat at Hannah May's feet, their differences forgotten in the simple comfort of family. The night air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, of storm-washed earth and possibility. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the town council's demands, the whispers, the hard work of building something new. But for now, in this moment, grace flowed as freely as the mountain streams, carving new channels through old stone. Summer settled into the mountain valley like a warm blanket. The days stretched longer, filled with the steady rhythm of work and care that transformed the old cabin into something new. Every morning, Elias rose before dawn to tend the growing garden, his broad shoulders bent over neat rows of corn and beans. The children followed behind him like ducklings, learning to pull weeds and watch for signs of frost. Inside, Hannah May brought order to chaos with quiet determination. Her fingers knew every corner of the cabin now, every shelf and drawer. She taught the children to fold blankets into precise squares, to sweep the floor in careful patterns, to stack dishes where she could find them by touch. Her blindness became less a hindrance and more a lesson in patience and attention. Listen, she would say, turning her face toward a sound. That's a chickadee calling. God gave them such tiny voices, but they sing with all their heart. The children learned to describe things for her in detail: the color of wildflowers, the shapes of clouds, the way morning light painted the mountain peaks. Thomas, especially, had a gift for it. His 2 languages gave him twice the words to capture beauty. The sunrise is like copper in a blacksmith's fire, he told her one morning. Como el cobre en el fuego. Hannah May smiled, touching his cheek. What a lovely way to see it. Every Sunday, Elias hitched the wagon for the journey to church. The children wore their cleanest clothes, hair combed smooth, while Hannah May sat straight and dignified beside him on the wagon seat. The little church perched on a hill outside town, its white walls gleaming in the morning light. At first, the congregation stared and whispered, but when Hannah May's voice rose during hymns, clear and strong as mountain water, the whispers turned to wonder. She knew every verse by heart, her face lifted toward heaven as she sang, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Even the most suspicious townsfolk found themselves joining in, carried along by the pure conviction in her voice. After services, some began approaching with small offerings: a sack of flour here, a pair of outgrown boots there, blankets patched but warm. Mrs. Peterson, the midwife who had brought Thomas, became their steadiest ally. She visited often, bringing medical supplies and news from town. More importantly, she brought acceptance, treating all the children with equal kindness regardless of their origins. "You're doing good work here," she told Elias one afternoon, watching the children help him mend the chicken coop. "These little ones needed a home, and you've given them one." But not everyone shared her view. Resentment simmered in certain quarters of town, particularly among those who believed different races shouldn't mix. They muttered about proper procedures and documentation, about the dangers of taking in strays. The tension came to a head one evening in late summer. They had just finished supper, bean soup and cornbread, with wild berries the children had gathered. Hannah May was teaching Sarah to knit by feel, while James and Thomas played checkers near the fire. Elias sat in his chair by the door, whittling a toy horse from pine wood. The sound of hoofbeats brought him to his feet. A rider approached through the dusk, his horse lathered with hard riding. It was Bill Taylor, one of the friendlier merchants from town. "Evening, Boone," he called, dismounting quickly. His face was troubled in the fading light. "Thought you ought to know? Council met today. They're sending for a marshal." Elias's hands tightened on the doorframe. "A marshal?" "To remove the children." Taylor shifted uncomfortably. "They're saying you need proper guardianship papers, permits for running an orphanage. Some folks are riled up about it, especially with—" He glanced toward the window where Thomas sat visible in the lamplight. Inside, Hannah May had gone very still. Her knitting needles paused mid-stitch. The children sensed the tension, drawing closer to her like chicks to a hen. Elias's voice came low and dangerous. "These children have nowhere else to go." "I know that," Taylor said. "Plenty of us know that. But the law's the law, and some people are dead set on enforcing it. Let them try." Elias's fists clenched at his sides, violence humming in his muscles like a plucked wire. "Elias." Hannah May's voice carried from inside, gentle but firm. "Come in now and thank Mr. Taylor for the warning." The merchant nodded gratefully. "I'd best get back, just wanted you to be prepared. Marshal could arrive any day now." After Taylor rode away, Elias paced the cabin like a caged bear. The children watched with wide eyes until Hannah May sent them to bed with songs and prayers. Only when their breathing had settled into sleep did she speak. "Violence won't solve this," she said softly. "You expect me to stand by while they tear apart our family?" The word slipped out before he could catch it, making his chest tight with unnamed feelings. "I expect you to trust God's timing." Hannah May's fingers found his arm, steady and warm. "These children have seen enough violence. We must show them a better way." Elias sank into his chair, the fight draining from him. "I can't lose them. Can't lose." He trailed off, unable to voice his deeper fear. Hannah May moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. Maybe what we're building is stronger than their laws. His throat closed around words he couldn't say. In the quiet cabin, with moonlight streaming through the windows and children's soft breathing in the next room, Elias felt something tender and terrifying unfold in his chest. It wasn't just fear of losing the children, though that cut deep enough. It was the thought of losing this. These evenings with Hannah May's calm presence beside him, her wisdom tempering his anger, her faith steady as the mountains themselves. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting shadows on the walls. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the darkness, its voice lonely and sweet. Elias covered Hannah May's hand with his own, rough fingers gentle against her skin. "What if we can't stop them?" he whispered. "Then we'll face it together," she answered. "But I believe God brought us all here for a purpose. He won't abandon us now." Her quiet confidence washed over him like cool water on fevered skin. Even now, facing the possible destruction of everything they'd built, she maintained her trust in divine timing. Elias wondered if he could find such faith, or if his old habits of solving problems with force would win out. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, counting moments that suddenly seemed precious and fleeting. Each small sound of their home, the settling logs, the night wind in the eaves, the creak of floorboards under his feet, struck him as something that could be lost. But Hannah May's hand remained warm and sure on his shoulder, anchoring him to hope. Whatever came with the marshal's arrival, they would meet it as they had met everything else, together, with strength born of love rather than fear. Through the open window, the stars wheeled bright and constant above the mountain peaks. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but for now, in the quiet sanctuary of their home, peace settled over them like a blessing. Early summer arrived like a painting come to life in the mountain meadows. Purple lupines and golden rabbit brush dotted the slopes, while Indian paintbrush blazed scarlet against the grass. The morning air carried the sweet scent of wild roses and fresh-turned earth from the garden plot Elias had cleared behind the cabin. Hannah May stood in the doorway, her face tilted toward the warmth of the sun. The sounds of children's laughter floated up from the garden where they helped plant the season's crops. Her heart swelled with joy at their happiness, so different from the frightened silence of their early days. "Time to plant the beans," she called out, making her way carefully down the worn path. Her fingers trailed along the guide rope Elias had strung between posts to help her navigate independently. "I've got the seeds right here, Miss Hannah," Sarah replied, pressing a cloth bag into her hands. Hannah May smiled, reaching out to touch Sarah's cheek. The girl had grown stronger in recent months, her face fuller, her voice carrying confidence instead of fear. All the children showed similar changes, their bodies and spirits healing under steady care. "Now remember what I taught you," Hannah May said, kneeling in the soft dirt. Her fingers found the shallow furrow Elias had prepared. 3 finger widths between each seed and 2 knuckles deep. The children gathered around her, eager to help. Even little James, who'd barely spoken when he first arrived, now chattered happily about the sprouts he'd seen pushing through in the corn rows. "Like this, Miss Hannah?" Thomas asked, placing a bean carefully in the earth. Her sensitive fingers checked his work. "Perfect, dear heart. You have a natural touch for growing things." Elias paused in his hoeing to watch them. Hannah May moved with sure grace despite her blindness, teaching the children through touch and patient explanation. She had transformed his rough cabin into a true home, filling it with order and warmth he'd never known how to create alone. The morning passed in peaceful industry. Hannah May showed the children how to tell when the soil needed water by rolling it between their fingers. She taught them to identify helpful insects by their sounds and movements. Every lesson came with a story or song, making work feel like play. "The earth is the Lord's garden," she told them, "and we're His helpers in tending it. Every seed we plant is an act of faith." By afternoon, the garden rows stretched neat and promising. The children had dirt under their fingernails and hope in their hearts, a combination Hannah May said was good for growing souls. As evening approached, fireflies began rising from the grass like earthbound stars. The children chased them, their laughter carrying across the cooling air. Inside the cabin, Hannah May moved confidently through her evening routine, setting out bowls and spoons by touch while a pot of bean soup bubbled on the stove. "Smells mighty fine," Elias said, coming in from securing the animals for the night. "There's fresh bread too," she replied, smiling toward his voice. "The children helped knead it this morning." Soon they all gathered around the table, heads bowed for grace. The simple meal tasted rich with the satisfaction of work well done and the blessing of being together. Through the open window came the evening chorus of crickets and the soft calling of whippoorwills. After the dishes were cleared, Hannah May's voice rose in song, clear and sweet in the gathering darkness. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The familiar hymn filled the cabin with something holy. Even the crickets seemed to quiet, as if listening. The children's voices joined in on the verses they knew, while Elias found himself humming along, moved by memories of his mother singing the same words long ago. When the last note faded, Elias did something that surprised even himself. He knelt beside his chair, rough hands clasped in prayer. The words came haltingly at first, then stronger as his heart opened. "Lord," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I ain't been much for praying these past years. Carried too much darkness to feel worthy of your light. But tonight, I need to thank you. For these children you've trusted to our care. For this home that's more than just shelter now. For..." He paused, swallowing hard. "For sending Hannah May to show us all what real strength looks like. I never thought to have a family again. Never thought I deserved one after what I'd done. But you gave me one anyway. Help me be worthy of this blessing." Hannah May's own prayer followed softly. "Dear Father, I spent so many years believing I was cursed, that my blindness made me worthless. But you had a purpose for my suffering. You led me here, to these precious children, to this good man. You turned my darkness into light for others. Thank you for this family, Lord. Thank you for giving my life meaning beyond what I could have imagined." The children added their own simple thanks. For food and shelter, for safety and love, for being wanted instead of cast aside. Their innocent faith brought tears to Hannah May's eyes. As the evening deepened, she helped the little ones prepare for bed, her gentle hands smoothing hair and straightening quilts. Each child received a kiss and blessing, their bodies relaxing into the security of routine and care. Elias added wood to the fire, its warmth reaching out to touch them all. The flames painted dancing shadows on the walls as the children drifted to sleep, their breathing soft and even. Hannah May sat in her rocking chair, face turned toward the hearth's warmth, a peaceful smile gracing her features. The contentment in the cabin felt as tangible as sunlight. Though Hannah May couldn't see it with her eyes, she saw it clearly with her heart. The family God had built from broken pieces, the love that had grown strong as mountain pine. Here was proof that healing was possible, that new life could spring from the ashes of the old. Elias watched her in the firelight, marveling at how she had transformed not just his home, but his heart. The peace he'd searched for all those years after the war had found him here, in the simple gifts of daily grace. Children's laughter, shared meals, evening prayers, and Hannah May's unwavering faith. The fire crackled softly, its heat wrapping around them like a blessing. Outside, the night creatures sang their ancient songs while stars wheeled overhead. Inside, love had made its home, as natural and necessary as breathing. The morning had started peacefully enough. Elias rode into town for supplies, the wagon wheels creaking beneath sacks of grain they'd need for winter. The general store's bell jingled as he pushed through the door, nodding to Mrs. Patterson behind the counter. "Telegraph came for you, Mr. Boone," she said, her face pinched with worry. She handed over the yellow paper, averting her eyes. Elias's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the message. The words struck like hammer blows. Marshall T. Avery, en route stop. Arriving 3 days stop, an investigation of unauthorized orphan refuge stop. His jaw tightened as he crumpled the paper. Mrs. Patterson busied herself with arranging jars, pretending not to notice his distress. "Much obliged," he managed. gathering his purchases quickly. The ride home felt longer than usual, the weight of the news pressing down harder than the sacks of grain. Hannah May sensed something was wrong the moment he stepped into the cabin. She paused in her bread kneading, flour dusting her hands. "What is it, Elias?" He set down the supplies heavily. "Marshall's coming. 3 days." The children, playing quietly in the corner, went still at his tone. Little Sarah clutched her rag doll tighter. "The Lord will show us a way," Hannah May said firmly, but her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. The day passed in tense preparation. Elias checked and rechecked his guardian papers while Hannah May kept the children close, as if her presence alone could protect them. Evening brought the sound of hoofbeats approaching, but not the marshal. Not yet. The pounding on the cabin door made them all jump. Hannah May recognized the voice immediately, her face draining of color. "Get out here, girl. Your worthless hide belongs to me." "Papa," she whispered, and the word held years of pain. Elias moved toward the door, his stance protective. "Children, back room, now." They scurried away like frightened rabbits, Thomas leading the younger ones. The door burst open before Elias could reach it. Hannah May's father stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and rage. His clothes were trail dusty, his eyes bloodshot. "Ain't proper," he slurred, jabbing a finger at Elias. "That chicken bone deal wasn't no legal sale. She's my property, and I'm taking her back where she belongs." Hannah May stood straighter, though her hands gripped her apron. "No, Papa. I'm not going anywhere." "You ungrateful curse," he lurched forward. "After all I done for you." Elias stepped between them, his voice dangerous. "That's far enough. Don't you threaten me, Mountain Man. I heard about your little orphan collection. Town council's mighty interested in that. How'd you like them knowing about harboring Indian kids? Or how you bought yourself a blind woman with table scraps?" Hannah May moved forward, her unseeing eyes somehow finding her father's face. "I chose to stay here. This is my home now. These children need me, and I need them." "Need you?" Her father's laugh was cruel. "Nobody needs a blind burden. You're coming home where you can't shame me no more." "The only shame here," Hannah May said quietly, "is a father who'd sell his daughter for spite. God gave me this family, Papa. A real family. I won't let you destroy it." Her father's face twisted. "We'll see about that. Council's already sending a marshal. Reckon he'll be interested in how this mountain man stole my property. I'll be back with papers of my own." He staggered backward, nearly falling off the porch. His horse had wandered to the water trough, and it took him 3 tries to mount. They watched him weave down the trail, his curses floating back on the evening air. The moment he was gone, Hannah May's strength seemed to leave her. She sagged against the doorframe, shaking. Elias caught her gently. "You're safe," he murmured. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." "The children," she whispered. "I need to check on them." They found the little ones huddled in the back room, wide-eyed with fear. Sarah launched herself into Hannah May's arms, while James clutched Elias's leg. Thomas stood guard by the window, his young face serious. "Is the bad man gone?" Sarah whimpered. "Yes, dear heart." Hannah May stroked her hair. "And he can't hurt any of us. We're family now, remember? Family protects each other." But later, after the children were finally asleep, Hannah May's brave facade cracked. She sat by the fire, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What if he's right, Elias? What if I'm just bringing trouble to you and the children?" Elias knelt beside her chair, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "Listen to me, Hannah May. You're the heart of this place. The children were just existing before. Now they're living. You gave them that. Gave me that too, if I'm honest. But the marshal coming, and now Papa, we'll face it together." His voice held steel and tenderness both. "You belong here. The children belong here. Ain't no piece of paper can say different." Thunder rolled in the distance and wind rattled the window panes. Storm clouds were gathering over the mountain ridges, dark and heavy with rain. Hannah May turned her face toward the sound, and Elias saw fear there, but determination too. "I won't go back," she said softly. "I can't. Not after knowing what home really feels like. Elias squeezed her hands. Then you won't, I promise you that. The wind rose higher, carrying the first drops of rain. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled steadily, holding back the darkness. But they both knew larger storms were gathering. The marshal's arrival, Hannah Mae's father's threats, the council's judgment all looming like thunderheads on the horizon. Hannah Mae's fingers tightened around Elias's. Together they listened to the children's peaceful breathing from the back room, to the rising storm outside, to the beating of their own hearts. Each sound a reminder of all they stood to lose and all they would fight to protect. The rain began in earnest, drumming on the roof like warning drums. Storm clouds rolled thick and black over the ridges. But in the cabin, Elias and Hannah Mae held fast to each other, to their makeshift family, to the hope that love might prove stronger than law or blood or bitter history. The storm that had threatened all night broke at dawn, releasing sheets of rain that drummed against the cabin's shingled roof. Inside, the morning light struggled through water-streaked windows, casting gloomy shadows across the wooden floor. Elias stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense as he watched the deluge. The children huddled near the hearth where Hannah Mae kept the fire burning steady. Little Sarah clutched her rag doll, while James pressed close to his sister's side. Thomas sat cross-legged on the floor, whittling a stick with careful strokes, his dark eyes watchful. The crack of thunder made them all jump. Hannah Mae reached out, finding Sarah's shoulder with gentle fingers. "Just the Lord doing his spring cleaning," she said softly, but her smile was strained. Elias turned from the window, his boots heavy on the floorboards as he crossed to the corner where his rifle hung. The familiar weight of it felt right in his hands as he began cleaning it with practiced movements. Hannah Mae's head lifted at the sound of the ramrod sliding home. "Elias," she said, her voice tight with worry, "please don't." "Ain't planning to use it," he replied, though his jaw was set. "But I mean to be ready." "Violence won't solve this," she insisted. "It'll only prove them right about us." The children watched the exchange with wide eyes. Thomas set aside his whittling, moving closer to the younger ones as if to shield them. "What happens if the marshal comes?" James asked in a small voice. Before anyone could answer, thunder cracked again, closer this time. Hannah Mae gathered the children near, her fingers finding each small face. "We trust in the Lord," she said firmly. "He didn't bring us all together just to abandon us now." Elias said nothing, but his hands never stopped moving over the rifle. The day crawled by, measured in thunderclaps and rainfall. Hannah Mae kept the children occupied with songs and Bible stories, though her voice sometimes faltered when the wind howled particularly fierce. As dusk approached, the storm began to ease, but the tension in the cabin only grew. Elias paced between windows, checking sightlines, while Hannah Mae prepared a simple supper. None of them felt much like eating. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the dying storm just as the last light was fading. Elias's hand went to the rifle, but Hannah Mae stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Remember what we discussed," she whispered. "No violence, not in front of the children." The knock, when it came, was official and sharp. Elias opened the door to reveal Marshal Thomas Avery, his badge gleaming despite his rain-soaked appearance. Water dripped from his hat brim as he stepped inside, surveying the scene with stern eyes. "Mr. Boone," he said, nodding curtly, "I trust you know why I'm here." Elias stood his ground, though he kept the rifle pointed down. "These children have a home here. That's not for you to decide." The marshal removed his wet coat, revealing the gun at his hip. "I need to see proper guardianship papers for each child." The silence stretched thin. Hannah Mae's hands twisted in her apron as she waited for Elias's response. "Don't have any," Elias finally admitted, his voice rough. "But they're cared for, federal, safe." "The law requires more than good intentions," Marshal Avery said. He pulled out a stack of official documents, the paper crackling in the fire-lit room. "These children will need to be relocated to the state asylum in Carson City. It's a proper facility with trained staff." "No!" Sarah's cry pierced the air as she clung to Hannah Mae's skirts. The other children pressed close, James burying his face against her side while Thomas stood protective at her shoulder. Please. Hannah May stepped forward, her unseeing eyes somehow finding the marshal's face. This is their home. They're loved here. If someone must be punished, take me instead. The marshal's stern expression flickered. He looked from Hannah May's determined face to the children clutching at her, then to Elias's barely contained rage. Ma'am, I can see you care for these young ones, he said, his voice softening slightly. But the law is the law. These children need legal protection, proper documentation. They need love, Hannah May interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. They need family. How many papers does it take to prove that? I sympathize, the marshal said, though his hand rested near his gun as Elias shifted restlessly. But I have my orders. I'll give you 3 days to make arrangements. After that, I'll return with a wagon to transport them to Carson City. Sarah began to sob, and James wasn't far behind. Even Tomas's stoic face showed fear. Hannah May gathered them close, murmuring comfort even as her own tears fell. You can't do this, Elias growled, his knuckles white on the rifle stock. I can and I must. Marshal Avery retrieved his wet coat. 3 days, Mr. Boone. I suggest you use them to say your goodbyes. He left them there in the firelight, the door closing behind him with terrible finality. They listened to his horse splash away through the puddles, no one moving until the sound had faded completely. Then Elias exploded into motion, pacing the cabin like a caged bear. His boots thundered on the floorboards as he turned sharp corners, the rifle still gripped in his hands. It ain't right, he snarled. Ain't natural tearing apart a family like this. Mr. Elias? Tomas spoke up, his young voice steady despite his fear. Are they really going to take us away? Elias stopped his pacing, the rage draining from his face as he looked at the children. Sarah's tears had soaked Hannah May's skirts, while James trembled against her side. Tomas stood straight-backed but pale, trying so hard to be brave. I won't let them, Elias said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Hannah May lifted her face toward heaven, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then she began to pray, her voice carrying clear and strong through the cabin. Dear Lord, you brought us together when we were all lost and alone. You made us a family when the world said we couldn't be. Please don't let them separate us now. Show us your path through this valley. Her prayer continued, steady and true, while outside the storm clouds finally broke apart, revealing a sliver of starry sky. Elias resumed his pacing, but slower now, his footsteps matching the rhythm of Hannah May's words. The children gradually grew calmer under the familiar cadence of her voice, though they stayed close, as if afraid someone might snatch them away at any moment. Hannah May's prayer filled the cabin with something stronger than fear, a deep, quiet certainty that somehow, some way, love would find a path through this darkness. But as the night wore on and the children finally slept, exhausted by fear and grief, Elias continued his restless movement. He was caught between rage and desperation, between his instinct to fight and Hannah May's insistence on faith. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, full of terrible possibilities. Hannah May sat in her rocking chair by the fire, her hands folded in her lap. I can hear you wearing tracks in the floor, she said softly. Can't help it. Elias paused by the window, peering out at the rain-washed night. Keep thinking about riding out, taking the children somewhere they can't find us. That's not the answer, Hannah May said. We'd spend our lives running, looking over our shoulders. What kind of home would that be? Better than letting them take the young ones to that asylum. His voice broke slightly. You ain't seen those places, Hannah May. Cold as prison cells with nurses hard as stone. Then we pray harder, she said firmly. We trust that the Lord didn't bring us this far to abandon us now. Elias resumed his pacing, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Hannah May's steady presence was the only thing keeping his fury in check, her quiet faith like an anchor in the storm. From the back room came a small whimper, one of the children crying in their sleep. Hannah May rose immediately, finding her way to them with perfect sureness despite her blindness. Elias watched her go, his heart clenching at how naturally she moved through their home, how completely she belonged here. Her voice drifted back to him, soft and soothing as she comforted whoever had woken afraid. The sound of it caught in his chest like a physical ache. How could the law say this wasn't right? How could papers and regulations mean more than the simple truth of love? The night stretched long before them, full of prayers and fears and desperate planning. But through it all, Hannah Mae's voice remained steady, calling them back to faith when rage or despair threatened to overwhelm. It was the only certainty they had left to cling to as they waited for dawn, and whatever it might bring. Dawn painted the mountain peaks with pale gold as Elias saddled his horse. The leather creaked beneath his hands, familiar motions that usually brought comfort. Today, they felt hollow. Inside the cabin, he could hear Hannah Mae's voice raised in morning prayer with the children. "Lord, watch over them," he whispered, checking the cinch one final time. The morning air bit cold against his face as he mounted up. Hannah Mae stood in the doorway, her unseeing eyes turned toward the sound of hoofbeats. "Remember what we talked about," she called softly. "No violence." Elias touched the brim of his hat, though she couldn't see the gesture. "I'll do my best. That's all the Lord asks of any of us." She smiled, then turned back to quiet the worried murmur of children's voices from inside. The trail into town wound between pine shadows and patches of early sunlight. Elias let his horse pick its way carefully down the slope, mind churning with arguments he might make to the council. Proper words had never come easy to him. Action had always been his strength. But Hannah Mae was right. Violence would only make things worse. Town emerged from the trees. A scatter of wooden buildings and muddy streets still puddled from yesterday's rain. Few people were about this early, though smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge. Elias dismounted there, hoping to hear any news before confronting the council directly. The smith, Joe Weber, looked up from his work as Elias approached. "Morning," he grunted, hammering sparks from a piece of red-hot iron. Two other men lounged nearby, warming their hands at the forge. "Morning," Elias replied, keeping his voice neutral. He pretended to check his horse's shoe while the men resumed their conversation. "Council met last night, special session," one was saying. "Signed all the papers already from what I heard." "That mountain man ain't gonna like it," the other replied. "Heard he's got quite a temper when riled." "Marshall's got the law on his side," Weber said, dunking the iron in water with a hiss of steam. "Them orphans need proper care, not some makeshift setup with no papers to back it." Elias's hand crept toward his gun before he caught himself. Hannah Mae's words echoed in his mind. "Let's answer them with kindness, not fire." He forced his fingers to unclench. "Reckon that blind woman's got 'em all bewitched," the first man continued. "Singing hymns and telling stories like some kind of angel. But good intentions ain't enough, not when it comes to children." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Elias had heard enough. His chest felt tight with helpless rage as he mounted up again. All morning he rode from place to place, the general store, the sheriff's office, even the small church, seeking anyone who might help. But everywhere he found closed doors and shaking heads. The sun was setting by the time he turned his tired horse toward home. Golden light slanted through the trees, but he took no comfort in its beauty. He had failed them all. Yet as he approached the cabin, something caught his ear. Singing. Hannah Mae's clear voice lifted in harmony with the children's, carried on the evening breeze. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me. Elias stopped his horse, listening. The simple melody wrapped around his heart like a healing bandage. He could pick out each voice. Sarah's high, sweet notes. James's earnest effort to stay on key. Thomas's quiet but steady tone. And through it all, Hannah Mae's voice, strong and true, leading them home. He dismounted slowly, every muscle aching from the long day's ride. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight. The children sat close around Hannah Mae's rocking chair while she taught them a new verse. They looked up as he entered, faces bright with welcome despite their underlying fear. "Mr. Elias," Sarah called. "Miss Hannah Mae's been teaching us all her favorite hymns today." "That so?" He tried to smile, though his heart was heavy. "Sounds real nice." Hannah May's face turned toward him, reading his tone. "Children," she said gently, "why don't you go fetch water for supper? Take the bucket together now." They filed out, leaving Elias alone with Hannah May. He sank into a chair, bone-weary. "I failed them," he said roughly. "Council's already signed the papers. Marshall's got full authority to take them." Hannah May rocked quietly for a moment. "You didn't fail anyone," she said at last. "You tried your best." "My best ain't good enough," the words burst out of him. "I'm supposed to protect them, but I can't fight the law. Can't fight the whole town. His voice broke. "I'm helpless." "Sometimes," Hannah May said softly. "That's exactly where God wants us. When we're at our weakest, that's when His strength shows brightest." Elias stared into the fire, letting her words sink in. The flames flickered, reminding him of something important. After the children were asleep that night, he lit a lamp and knelt by his bed. The floorboards creaked as he pried one loose, revealing a hidden space beneath. From it, he drew out an old strong box, its metal surface dulled with age. Inside lay papers, yellow with time but still intact. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded them, reading by lamplight. Land deeds, legal documents, things he'd hidden away years ago, too ashamed of his past to look at them. But now, he traced the official seals with one rough finger, mind working furiously. He didn't speak, but determination settled over his features like iron cooling into shape. Hannah May's voice drifted from her room, singing the children to sleep with another hymn. The gentle sound wrapped around him, strengthening his resolve. Whatever came next, he would face it with both faith and action. He carefully replaced the strongbox but left it where he could reach it easily. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. For now, he let Hannah May's song wash over him, carrying hope in its melody. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Hannah May stood at the wooden counter, her capable hands kneading bread dough while the children played quietly in the corner. The familiar motions brought comfort even as worry gnawed at her heart. Elias had been peculiarly quiet since dawn. She could sense him moving about the cabin, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Finally, she heard him clear his throat. "Children," he said, his deep voice gentle. "Might be a good time to check those rabbit snares I showed you yesterday." There was a scramble of excited feet and the door creaked open and shut. Hannah May wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, turning toward where she knew Elias stood. "Something's on your mind," she said softly. "Need to show you something." His boots scraped across the floorboards. She heard him kneel, followed by the sound of wood shifting, a loose plank being lifted. Metal scraped against wood as he pulled something heavy from beneath the floor. "It's an old strongbox," he explained. "Been keeping these papers hidden here for years." Paper rustled as he unfolded what sounded like several documents. "Never thought they'd matter again till now." Hannah May waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. "Years back after the Apache Wars," Elias continued, his voice rough with memory, "I couldn't live with what I'd done. Burning villages, leading soldiers to camps." He paused, gathering himself. "Came up here to these mountains to escape, but the guilt followed." The cabin creaked in the morning quiet as he moved to sit at the table. "One day I rode down to talk with the circuit preacher. Ended up deeding all this land, 300 acres, to a church trust. Made it so it wasn't mine anymore, but God's, meant for doing good works." Hannah May's hands stilled in surprise. "The whole mountain?" "Every acre." His chair shifted. "Papers are legal, filed proper with the territory office. This land don't belong to any single man now. It's church property." The implications slowly dawned on Hannah May. Her voice trembled with hope. "Then, the council can't just take the children. Not if we're doing the Lord's work on church land." "That's my thinking." Papers rustled again as Elias carefully refolded them. "But it ain't going to make those men happy. Some of them have been eyeing this land for timber. Won't take kindly to learning it's locked up in a trust." Hannah May moved carefully around the table, reaching out until her fingers found Elias's shoulder. "You gave up your land, all those years ago." "Wasn't giving up," he said quietly. "Was trying to make something right out of all the wrong I'd done." His calloused hand covered hers briefly. "Never thought the Lord would use it like this." "He works in mysterious ways," Hannah May whispered, her heart full of wonder at how God had woven their broken pieces into something whole. The day passed in a blur of activity as Elias rode to town again, this time to present the trust documents to the circuit preacher. Hannah May kept the children busy with chores and lessons, trying not to let her anxiety show. As evening approached, she heard horses in the yard, not just one, but several. The door opened, bringing the smell of pine and cooling air. But instead of trouble, she heard friendly voices. Mrs. Weber, the blacksmith's wife, called out, "Evening, Miss Hannah May. We brought some supper to share." More footsteps entered, accompanied by the wonderful smells of fresh bread and stew. Hannah May recognized the voices of several neighbors, ones who'd been quiet until now but had watched and listened. "Figured you all could use some extra provisions," someone said, setting down what sounded like a heavy basket. "Times being what they are." "The Lord provides," Hannah May said softly, touched by their kindness. She heard the children helping to unpack the gifts, jars of preserved fruits, sacks of flour, even some hand-me-down clothes that still had plenty of wear in them. But not all the evening's visitors brought friendship. Hoofbeats passed on the trail several times, accompanied by muttered threats that made Hannah May gather the children close. She recognized her father's voice among them once, slurred with drink and bitter as gall. After the children were tucked into bed, Hannah May sat in her rocking chair, listening to Elias bank the fire for the night. The events of the day swept over her. The revelation of the land trust, the neighbors' support, the growing tension. But something else moved in her heart, something she needed to speak. "Elias?" she said softly. His movements paused. "Yes?" "All my life, my father told me I was worthless, a curse, that no man would ever want me." Her voice shook slightly. "But here, with the children, with this purpose." She swallowed hard. "For the first time, I feel like I might be worth something after all." The fire popped in the silence that followed. Then Elias's boots crossed the floor until he stood beside her chair. His voice was low but clear. "You've been worth more than bones since the day I saw you." The simple words, spoken with such certainty, broke something loose inside her. Hannah May turned her face away, but not before tears slipped down her cheeks. She felt Elias's hand gentle on her shoulder, steadying her as she wept for all the years of shame, all the cruel words that were finally losing their power. Outside, a whippoorwill called in the gathering dark. Inside the cabin, Hannah May's tears gradually slowed. She wiped her eyes, drawing a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning far more than just his words. Elias's hand tightened briefly on her shoulder before he moved away to finish banking the fire. Neither spoke again, but the silence between them was full of understanding. Whatever storms were coming, they would face them together, on this mountain that belonged to God, in this home built of mercy and second chances. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in pale gold, but the beauty of the morning brought no peace to the homestead. Hannah May stood in the cabin doorway, her heart pounding as she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. The children huddled behind her skirts, their small hands clutching the rough fabric. "They're coming," Elias said from beside her, his voice steady despite the tension in his frame. "At least 8 riders." The sound grew louder until horses clattered into the yard, sending gravel spraying. Hannah May recognized the harsh laugh of her father even before he spoke. "Time's up, mountain man," her father shouted, his words slurring slightly even at this early hour. "Told you I'd be back with the law?" Marshal Thomas Avery's authoritative voice cut through the commotion. "Mr. Boone, we're here on official business. These children need proper guardianship under territorial law." The thunder of more hooves announced the arrival of others, neighbors coming to witness what would unfold. Hannah May heard Mrs. Weber's worried whisper and Reverend Parker's measured footsteps among them. Inside the cabin, little Sarah began to cry. The sound triggered panic among the other children, who scrambled deeper into the house. Only Thomas, the half-Apache boy, remained pressed against Hannah Mae's side, trembling but refusing to run. "It's all right, little ones," Hannah Mae called softly toward the hiding children. "The Lord hasn't brought us this far to abandon us now." Elias's boots creaked on the porch boards as he descended the steps. Hannah Mae could picture him, tall and strong, facing down the armed deputies without flinching. The morning breeze carried the leather scent of saddles and gun oil, along with the nervous shuffling of horses. "Marshal Avery," Elias said, his voice clear and carrying. "Before you take any action, there's something you need to see." Paper rustled as Elias withdrew the documents from his coat. Hannah Mae held her breath, praying the trust deed would carry the weight they hoped. "What's this foolishness?" her father spat. "More of your tricks?" "These are legal documents," Elias continued, ignoring the interruption. "Filed and recorded with the territorial office 5 years ago." His boots crunched on gravel as he approached the marshal's horse. "This land, all 300 acres, belongs to the church trust. It's designated for good works in service to God and community." Silence fell over the yard, broken only by the soft morning breeze in the pines. Hannah Mae could hear the marshal's saddle creak as he studied the papers. "By thunder, he's lying!" her father exploded. "It's some kind of scheme." "Be quiet, Collins," Marshal Avery commanded sharply. More paper rustled. "These appear genuine. The territorial seal is intact. Proper signatures from the circuit judge." "That's right," Elias said. "Which means you can't simply seize this property or remove these children. They're being cared for on church land as part of its charitable mission." Hannah Mae's father cursed violently. "What about her?" he demanded, and Hannah Mae knew he pointed at her. "She's my property, and I never gave permission for this marriage." "There is no marriage," Marshal Avery cut in, his tone thoughtful. "Which presents a problem. Even on church land, these children need legal guardians. Without proper marriage or adoption papers." Hannah Mae's heart sank. They had come so far only to stumble at this final hurdle. But then Elias's voice rang out, clear and determined. "Then I'll marry Hannah Mae right here, right now." A gasp went up from the gathered neighbors. Hannah Mae's hand flew to her throat, her chest tight with emotion. "What?" her father roared. "You can't." "I can," Elias said firmly. "She's of age. You sold any claim to her that night in the saloon, remember? For a sack of chicken bones." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hannah Mae heard Mrs. Weber whisper, "Lord have mercy." "Reverend Parker's right here," Elias continued. "He can perform the ceremony proper and legal. Then, Hannah Mae and I will petition for formal guardianship of all the children, as husband and wife, on church trust land." Hannah Mae's father spluttered in rage, but Marshal Avery spoke first. "That would satisfy the letter of the law, assuming the lady agrees." The yard fell silent. Hannah Mae felt every eye turn to her, though she could see none of them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she took a careful step forward. "Elias?" she called softly. "Do you mean it truly?" His boots crossed the yard until he stood before her. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, meant for her alone, though others could hear. "I meant it the day I brought you here. Meant it every morning since, watching you love these children like your own. I just didn't know how to say it proper." Tears spilled down Hannah Mae's cheeks as she smiled. Then yes, with all my heart. A cheer went up from the children, who burst from hiding to surround them. Even some of the neighbors clapped, while Hannah Mae's father cursed and spat in the dust. "Very well," Marshal Avery said, and Hannah Mae heard a smile in his voice. "Reverend Parker, if you would—" The preacher's boots crunched forward. "Brother Boone, Sister Collins, shall we proceed?" It was the simplest of ceremonies there in the mountain dawn. Hannah Mae wore her plain work dress, her hair hastily smoothed by Mrs. Weber's kind hands. Elias stood tall beside her, his calloused fingers warm around hers. The children gathered close, their earlier fear transformed to joy. Reverend Parker's voice rose strong and clear. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." Hannah Mae barely heard the familiar words, overwhelmed by the moment's beauty. Here, where she had expected shame and rejection, God had given her love, purpose, and family. She felt Elias's hand tighten on hers as they spoke their vows. "I do," she whispered, her voice thick with tears of joy. "I do," Elias answered, steady and sure. "Then, by the authority vested in me," Reverend Parker proclaimed, "I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." More cheers erupted. The children danced around them, singing and laughing. Hannah Mae heard her father's horse stamp and turn, carrying him away in defeat. Other hoofbeats followed, the deputies departing, their duty resolved by love and law together. "Marshal," Elias called, "will you witness our guardianship petition?" "Gladly," Marshal Avery replied. "Bring it by my office when you come to town. And congratulations to you both." As the marshal rode away, neighbors pressed forward with joy and blessing. Mrs. Weber hugged Hannah Mae tight, promising to bring a proper wedding supper that evening. Other hands clasped Elias's shoulder, offering congratulations and support. Through it all, Hannah Mae stood in the circle of Elias's strong arm, surrounded by the children's laughter, her heart so full it felt like bursting. This mountain had become more than refuge. It was truly home now, secured by love, faith, and the promise of forever. "Thank you," she whispered to Elias as the excitement swirled around them. His lips brushed her hair softly. "No, Hannah Mae. Thank you for making this house into a real home." Sarah tugged at Hannah Mae's skirt. "Does this mean we can stay forever and ever?" Hannah Mae knelt, gathering the little girl close. "Yes, sweet one. Forever and ever, by God's grace." More children piled into the embrace, and she felt Elias's strong arms encompass them all. The morning sun warmed their shoulders, as heaven smiled down on the family made whole at last. The evening settled soft and golden over the cabin, as neighbors crowded inside. Lamplight caught the fresh swept floors and newly dusted windows, casting a warm glow over gathered faces. Hannah Mae stood near the stone fireplace in a simple brown homespun dress that Mrs. Weber had helped her choose, her hands folded quietly before her. Elias looked different than anyone had ever seen him. Freshly shaven, his usual mountain man's beard trimmed neat, wearing a clean shirt with his best coat. His eyes never left Hannah Mae's face as Reverend Parker opened his Bible. The children sat in a half circle on the floor, their faces solemn with wonder. Little Sarah clutched a bunch of wildflowers she had picked for Hannah Mae's hair. Thomas, the Apache boy, sat straight-backed and dignified, clearly understanding the importance of the moment. When the time came for vows, Elias's deep voice filled the cabin. Taking Hannah Mae's hands in his, he spoke words that brought tears to every eye. "I never bought you for bones that night," he said roughly. "Truth is, I was buying back my own soul. You've helped me find my way back to God's grace." Tears streamed freely down Hannah Mae's cheeks as she squeezed his hands. Marshal Avery, standing near the door, removed his hat and held it over his heart, deeply moved. With a quiet gesture, he motioned his deputies to stand down. Hannah Mae's father stormed out into the darkness, defeated at last, but few noticed his departure. The cabin glowed with joy as neighbors stepped forward to embrace the new couple, promising supplies for the children, blankets, books, preserves for winter. Hope blazed bright as the lamplight, warming every corner of the cabin that had become more than refuge. It was now truly home, secured by love and honor before God and community. In the days that followed the wedding, the mountain air seemed lighter, sweeter somehow. Wagons creaked up the winding trail to the cabin, bringing gifts from townsfolk who had changed their hearts. Mrs. Peterson arrived with 3 carefully stitched quilts, their patterns bright against the summer sky. Old Tom Wheeler brought seeds for the garden and new tools for working the soil, while his wife carried jars of preserved peaches. In the meadow beside the cabin, wildflowers nodded in the breeze as children's laughter rang out. Hannah May sat in her rocking chair on the porch, her clear voice carrying across the grass as she taught them the 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd," the young voices repeated, the words rising like birdsong. Elias worked steadily in the barn, hammering new boards into place where the old ones had rotted. The rhythmic sound of his work mixed with the children's voices, creating a melody of purpose and peace. His shoulders, once heavy with guilt, moved easier now, as if an invisible burden had lifted. That evening, Reverend Parker joined them for supper, breaking bread at the long table while sunset painted the cabin walls golden. Looking around at the gathered faces, he smiled. "From chicken bones," he said softly, "God has raised a family." Hannah May's gentle laugh filled the room as she reached for Elias's hand. Later, after small feet had been washed and tired children tucked into bed, Elias and Hannah May sat together by the crackling fire. He took her hand in his rough one, his voice tender. "You'll never be shamed again," he promised. "Never be unwanted." Hannah May leaned against his shoulder, her fingers intertwined with his. "Through you," she whispered, "God has redeemed me." The firelight danced across their faces as peace settled over the cabin like a blessing. Golden autumn light painted the mountain slopes as evening settled over the refuge. Maple leaves danced on the breeze, their colors matching the rich sunset above. The cabin's porch creaked gently under the weight of gathered children, their faces glowing in the fading day. Hannah May sat in her favorite rocker, her hands folded in her lap as young voices lifted in song. The hymn she had taught them, "Amazing Grace," floated pure and clear through the mountain air. Little Thomas's voice rang out strongest, no longer shy about singing in English. Elias stood beside her chair, one strong hand resting on her shoulder, his other arm wrapped protectively around her, drawing her close. Though she couldn't see the spectacular sunset before them, he painted it with his words, his voice soft with wonder. "The sky's a river of fire turning to gold," he murmured, describing how the clouds caught the light like burning cotton. Hannah May smiled, whispering her thanks, her face turned up toward the warmth she could feel on her skin. Around them, the homestead showed the fruits of their labor. The garden beds lay rich with autumn harvest, squash and pumpkins dotting the dark soil. Fresh split rails marked the mended fence line, and smoke curled steadily from the chimney, promising warmth within. What had once been a broken-down cabin now stood proud, its walls echoing with life and laughter. Elias gazed at the children, then down at Hannah May, his heart full. His plan, shocking as it had seemed that night in the saloon, had never been about mere charity. It had been about finding his way back to faith, about building the family he never thought he'd have. The hymn swelled in the cooling air, carried by young voices across the valley. Like a promise, it echoed off the distant ridges, a testament to redemption, to peace hard-won and precious. The sound filled the evening with hope, as bright as the fading sun. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.